In today's tutorial, we are going to talk about writing methods in Java. When we write a method that's not involved with a class, we can put it right in our main class here, but we need to include the keyword static with them. So each method is going to have a header, and each header has three main parts to it. All of our methods are going to be public, static. That will allow us just to easily call the method right from this class without creating an object. The next part is the return type. Our first method that we're going to write is not going to return anything back, so it's going to be a void. And we're just going to name this one print stuff. It also is not going to have any parameters, and parameters are what's going to go in the parentheses. So when we write a method, if the method would need some information in order to work, it would have parameters, and we would put the parameters right inside the parentheses. If there is no parameters, you still need to include empty parentheses. The void indicates that this method is not going to return anything back to whoever called it. So this method's just simply, and when I create the method, I'm going to have an open bracket and a closed bracket. So all the code that goes for this method will go in between those brackets. And let's say this method's just going to print something. So it's just going to say system.out.println. This is my first method. So now in order to call this method and have it run, I need to go into my main, and I'm going to be calling all of my methods from the main. So call all methods here. And when I call it, I just simply need to put its name down. So print stuff with the empty parentheses and a semicolon, and that's just all I need to do to call it. So this is very similar to doing a function in Python. So if I were to run this, it's going to go ahead, it knows to go to the method print stuff and do whatever's inside of it, which you can see there. So I'm going to show you another couple of examples of methods. So my next example is going to be a method that still doesn't return anything. So public, static, void, and we're going to call this one add and print. So this isn't going to return anything, but it does need some information because it's going to add two numbers together and print them. So it actually needs to know what the numbers are that it's going to add. So in the parameters, we're going to have two integer parameters, and I just name them x and y by choice. So what that's saying is that I'm expecting probably in the method that I'm going to add int and x, y together. So let's say int sum equals x plus y. And then I'm just going to print that. And so now if I were to call this method now, add and print, it is now in the parentheses, it's expecting me to send it two values. So let's say I send it 5 and 8 as my two values. So now when I run this one, it's going to take in the values 5 and 8, add them together, and then print that value, and that's why you're getting the 13. So any method that doesn't return a value is always going to be void. If the method needs some information to work, we're going to be including parameters in the parentheses to indicate what kind of information it needs to work. So now let's do an example of one that will return something. So public, static. This time I'm going to return an integer, and we're just going to get a random number. And we're just keeping with really simple methods. So get random doesn't require any information from the outside to work. We're just literally going to generate a random number and return it. So we're going to say int ran equals, and then we're going to just generate a math.random times 100. So we're generating a random number from 0 to 99. And any method that's indicating that it's supposed to return something like this is. So instead of void, you see int. So int is telling us the type of variable it's going to return. So because it's an integer, that means I have to return an integer. So the reason there's a red squiggly line under get random is because it's telling me right here that this method must return something, and it isn't currently. So I have to add in here a return statement that says return ran. Now, when I call a method that returns something, I have to treat it a little bit differently. I can't just do this, because basically what's happening is when I call this method, it's sending a value back. So I either need to store that value or print that value. So I could say like int x is equal to get random. And the reason that I used int is because this method is intended to return an integer. So I need to store it as an int, and then I could say system.out.print x, for example, or maybe I do something else with x. Or let's say I don't really need to store it for any reason, I just need to see it. So I could just say system.out.println, and I could call get random right in the println. And that would basically just, so this would just get the random and print it all in the same line. So again, I'll run it, and you'll see two different random numbers getting printed. The first random number was when I called it here. The second random number was when I called it here. So finally, we'll kind of do the last type of method where it's going to both return something and it needs a parameter. So like public static, and it doesn't have to be int. Let's use a double this time. How about divide the nums? And I'm expecting two values to come in here so that I can divide them. So the purpose of this method is it's going to take x and y and divide them, and it's going to return that result back to whoever's calling it. So for this one, if I said double ants is equal to x divided by y, and then I need to return ants. So pretty similar, except that, you know, we're both taking something in from the user and we're returning something back to the user. And when I talk about the user, I'm talking about wherever this method is getting called. It's taking info in and it's sending info back. And just to be clear, the info, the parameters, and the returns can be any type of variable depending on what the method is doing. So when I go to call this one, let's just we're just going to say system.out.println, and this is divide the nums, and it's expecting me to send something in. So I'm going to send it 10, comma 2.5. So what is it? It's basically I'm sending it the value of 10 and the value of 2.5 as my two values x and y. So this x is basically, when it gets called, it's getting replaced with 10. The y is getting replaced with 2.5. It does the calculation that we ask it to do and then returns the answer. And because this is in a system.out, it's going to go ahead and just print that answer that it gets when it does it. So we'll go ahead and run it one last time. And you can see that 10 divided by 2.5 is 4, and that's the value that it gave when it ran it. So there's a quick intro to writing methods. Methods will allow us to organize our classes. So if we're writing something that's a little bit more complex, so if we go back to, say, when we wrote the 21 or the tic-tac-toe, there were some of the things we did in there that would have been nice to have kind of organized or separated from the project. And this would allow us to do that, to take pieces of that and break it into chunks, which makes it more readable. And if it was something that we used more than once, now we can just call that method over and over again, you know, and reuse code instead of rewriting it twice.